Let's take a look at the mercy seat. In the Old Testament, we read in Exodus 25, verse 17, you shall make a mercy seat of pure gold. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, and 1.5 cubits its width. And we see a picture there to the right of the ark, and somewhat like it probably looked very similar to what it probably looked like. But that word there, mercy seat, comes from this word we're seeing on the screen. Not totally sure how to pronounce that, kapurth or something, but lid, the mercy seat, the ark, we can see that word exactly symbolize that. And it was derived from, we see there another word popping up to the right, that word came from like kafar and to cover, look at that. Something like bitumen that was used on the ark. So expiate, appeasing something, atoning, cleansing. So we see what the purpose of the ark was in the Old Testament and some of the words in the Old Testament used for it. Let's move on to the New Testament. The ark is mentioned in the New Testament, Hebrews 9 verse 5, and above it were the cherubim of glory overshadowing the mercy seat. Of these things we cannot now speak in detail, but we look at that word, and in the New Testament the word is something along the line of hilasterion, and atoning victim, the lid of the ark, mercy seat again. And once again, that word is derived, notice another word popping up here, from this one over here, to atone for sin, etc., etc., be merciful, reconciliation. Well, that might seem pretty boring so far, but what is neat is in our next slide, we see Christ. And in verses like Romans 3, verse 25, we're told, whom God set forth as a propitiation by his blood through faith to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance God had passed over the sins that were previously committed. And that word propitiation, or however it's translated in your version, comes from, guess what? Hilasterion, the exact same word used for the ark. Now, isn't that interesting and exciting? As we see Jesus on the cross there in the image, remind us this is exactly like the mercy seat. So same word used for Christ in the mercy seat, as I'm popping things on the bottom right of the slide there. And remember that veil of the temple being torn? And we've had other videos on it. This is part of the story. Remember that mercy seat was behind that veil? We see very similar why, as Christ is dying on the cross, that veil is torn, showing, as we're seeing here, there's a lot of things between the mercy seat and Christ. The high priest had to approach that mercy seat once a year. You know, as Christians, as part of the royal priesthood, we can approach, all of us can approach Christ and have access to God. There was reconciliation through the mercy seat. There's reconciliation to God and appeasing and atoning through Christ. The mercy seat was approached yearly by that high priest, making sacrifice for himself and then the sins of the people. But Christ did it once for all times, didn't he? And the mercy seat, it ended, if you will, with the old law, or finally when Christ died there, yes, and the new law was established, it ended. And Christ, this will be till the end of time here on the earth. We will be able as Christians to approach God the Father through Christ. So this popped up, the torn veil symbolized no longer having to go through the high priest for access to God the Father via the mercy seat. All will be able to access God as members of the royal priesthood through Christ. And we see a verse here to the right, 1 Peter 2:5, to prove that we're not misrepresenting this. You also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood. You are part of the priesthood as Christians, part of the church, the spiritual house of God, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God. And how in the world can we as failed humans be able to offer sacrifices to God that are acceptable? It's through Jesus Christ, as we see on that slide. We are part of a royal priesthood through Jesus Christ, who can use him just like the priest of the Old Testament and approach God the Father and have reconciliation.